It has been a busy one. Thank you for sticking with us. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. We're happy to have you with us as we end the week. We're going to begin this Friday morning with the Trump transition now well underway. We've also got another state being called for the future 47th president to tell you about.
NBC News now projects President-elect Trump has won the state of Nevada and its 6 electoral votes. This is a state Mr. Trump lost in both 2016 and 2020. In fact, it's the first time a Republican has won Nevada since George W. Bush in 2004. This win gives the president-elect more than 300 electoral votes, well past the 270 needed to win the White House. Looking ahead now to his administration, President-elect Trump named co-campaign chair Susie Wiles as his incoming White House chief of staff. She's going to be the first woman to ever hold that job. She was previously Mr. Trump's state director in Florida during the 2016 and 2020 campaigns.
We are also learning new details about one of his top priorities for his second term. The president-elect tells NBC News exclusively that when it comes to border security, there will be, quote, no price tag for his mass deportation plan.
NBC News correspondent Dasha Burns joins us now with the very latest on this transition. Dasha, good morning. Let's begin with President-elect Trump's incoming chief of staff, Susie Wiles. We know she's a well-known, respected operative in the world of Republican politics. She was credited with giving the campaign discipline over the last few months. So why was she tapped for this role in the upcoming administration?
Well, look at the results, Joe and Savannah, that you just pointed out there. The former president winning Nevada, a Republican hadn't won that state in 2 decades. And a lot of this is credited to how Susie Wiles ran this campaign. She is no nonsense, no drama. You know, there's a mantra behind the scenes of let Trump beat Trump. And she certainly lived by that. But she also reined in some of the chaos that tends to follow him and did follow him in his past campaigns and his past administration. This is a campaign that had fewer leaks, fewer backstabbing, just less drama all around. And that was largely thanks to Susie. She was always the front runner for this job. So no surprise, but she's certainly making history, guys.
Dasha, President-elect Trump has not spoken publicly since his victory speech earlier this week, but he did speak with NBC News exclusively. We were just mentioning this. This is about some of his top priorities for when he takes office in January. What are we learning particularly when it comes to that plan for mass deportations?
Yeah, he spoke to our colleague Kristen Welker, telling her that there is no price tag for how much he's willing to spend on this. He feels, he told her that we have no choice as a nation but do this. This has been something he's talked about nonstop on the campaign trail. And now that he has seen this massive win, both in sweeping the swing states and with the popular vote, he really feels like he has a mandate from the American people to carry it out. Still not a whole lot of details about exactly how such a massive undertaking would work, but he is determined to do it, guys.
And Dasha, I mean, Mr. Trump's win over Vice President Harris means he maintains his hold on the Republican Party for the next 4 years. We know he can't run again in 2028 because of the 22nd Amendment to the Constitution, can't do more than 2 terms. But the party is already looking into the future. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, they're looking into the future, but Trump's shadow is long and tall and large. He is still going to have massive influence over the succession plan. He remains a kingmaker. Who he decides to elevate over these next 4 years, whether it's his now vice president-elect J.D. Vance or some of the other characters that have emerged from the party, he will wield a massive, massive influence here. But the party does have to figure out what is next, and that's in part why he picked such a running mate in Vance, only 40 years old, only 2 years of experience in the Senate. But it'll be fascinating to see how this man, who has really reshaped the party in his image, now decides to look at a succession plan.
Because, of course, we are already talking about
I know. Let's just not.
Dasha, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Well, in his first speech since the election, President Biden reaffirmed his commitment to a peaceful transfer of power and urged Americans to turn the page.
Addressing the nation from the Rose Garden, the president said he had spoken with President-elect Trump to congratulate him on his victory and called on the American people to come together.
Something I hope we can do, no matter who you voted for, is see each other not as adversaries, but as fellow Americans. Bring down the temperature. I also hope we can lay to rest the question about the integrity of the American electoral system. Now we have 74 days to finish the term, our term. Let's make every day count. Setbacks are unavoidable, but giving up is unforgivable.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us now from Washington. Monica, good morning. So there at the end a little bit that we hear the president trying to reassure Democrats. He also took the opportunity to promote his administration's achievements, give praise to his vice president, Kamala Harris, on her campaign. Tell us about some of the key takeaways in what was, I assume, a difficult address to give. What else did he say?
And it was striking, Savannah and Joe, because this was a president who came out and delivered this message. After 8 years ago, he was standing there as the vice president next to then President Obama in a similar situation, congratulating then President-elect Trump and welcoming him to the White House. And that was in contrast to, of course, what we saw in 2020 when the same courtesies were not extended to Joe Biden, when the roles were reversed. So this was really about trying to restore some of that tradition, to talk about the Democratic process, yes, to also acknowledge what the president called, and his own vice president, her historic campaign, and also to talk about and hint at priorities in these final 10 weeks in office, which will be to focus on some of the implementation of some of the legislation, but also to really set this tone that they're going to try to do everything possible to help this be a smooth transition of power, and that they have communicated that to the Trump transition team, which again just stands out in stark contrast to what we saw 4 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, so President Biden did mention the timeline he's up against now, 74 days left in his term. I mean, what are we learning about what he plans to do realistically with the time he has left? I know there's also questions about whether he would pardon his son Hunter for his conviction on those federal gun charges and his guilty plea on tax evasion charges. Any updates there?
Yeah, and this is something that he was asked about back when Hunter Biden was convicted in June, and he said in a couple of interviews and instances that he was not considering a pardon or a commutation. Yesterday, the White House press secretary was asked the same thing, whether there was any update there, and she said, we've been asked this multiple times, and our answer is still no. But in terms of the agenda and some of the other final priorities, there are still a couple of deals that could be made within some of this legislation, like chips and manufacturing, and trying to get some companies on board to try to use some of the money that's been allocated to actually get that going. But the president was really referring to this yesterday, saying people maybe are only starting to feel the effects of some of the things they were able to do in office, like with infrastructure or with some of these other things that they were able to do with Congress. But there's a real awareness, Savannah and Joe, that some of the things they feel they accomplished could really be reversed fairly quickly when Donald Trump returns to Washington. So there's a focus on that aspect as well.
We're still waiting, of course, Monica, to find out who will win control of the House. But we know Democrats losing the Senate, the White House. And so now leading figures in the party, the finger pointing is starting here. Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders, he accused Democrats of abandoning working class people. How's the Biden administration pushing back on that?
Yeah, and first, the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, said, look, we, of course, overall respect and have partnered with Senator Sanders. But then she did say that specifically on his critique, which was quite blistering, she disagreed on a couple of fronts. And she said specifically that she thought President Biden and this administration had really worked with unions, had really worked with workers, had really prioritized the middle class. And so she argued that their overall case here had been one that should have acknowledged and should have been reflective of the ones that Senator Sanders said had been frankly dismissed or not as appreciated heading into this election. But really, if you look at the demographic shift and what happened and what really took place here in this election, there is a lot of finger pointing and Democratic anxiety about just how wrong things went this cycle. Savannah and Joe.
Monica Alba, thank you so much.
On the world stage, Russian President Vladimir Putin congratulated Mr. Trump publicly for his election win yesterday and said he would be interested in talks with the president-elect. The connection and mutual admiration the two leaders have for one another drew much scrutiny during President-elect Trump's first term. NBC News chief international correspondent Keir Simmons takes a closer look at their relationship.
President Putin congratulating President-elect Trump, signaling he's open to a meeting, perhaps even before the inauguration.
If he makes a phone call, if he says, Vladimir, let's meet. So you're willing to talk to Trump? Yes, we are.
Holding court for hours at an annual discussion group in Russia. But it is this first reaction to the election that is making headlines, effusively praising Trump.
His behavior when there was an attempt on his life, I was impressed. He's a courageous person. A person shows their true color in these emergencies. And this is precisely one of those cases, and I think he acquitted himself admirably.
If he says great things about me, I'm going to say great things about him. I've already said he is really very much of a leader, far more than our president has been a leader. Getting along with Russia is a good thing, not a bad thing.
The two men held multiple controversial summits during the last Trump administration.
I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be. Vladimir, thank you very much.
2 weeks ago, I asked President Putin about his long-running relationship with President Trump. We are weeks away from the US election. Russia again is accused of interfering, and that you have had private conversations with former President Trump. Have you been speaking with him, and what have you been saying?
As for my contacts with Mr. Trump, well, this is a thing that has been discussed through rumors. If the U.S. is open towards building a normal, healthy relations with Russia, then we will do the same. But it's going to be the choice of the future administration.
Putin even echoing Trump election themes, like his suggested ban on transgender athletes in women's sports.
The opportunity for men to compete in women's sports, it simply destroys women's opportunities. Women should compete with women.
The Kremlin saying it's not planning to contact President Biden. The two have not spoken for a long time. But the Kremlin did not rule out a Putin-Trump summit before January, or even a Russian delegation invited to the inauguration. Others in Moscow still cautious of a second Trump administration. Before the election, a pro-Putin lawmaker who was jailed in America accused of spying, telling NBC News,
I served time when Trump was in charge, and the hostile sanctions were placed on Russia during the Trump era, and the expulsion of the diplomats, Russian diplomats, was during the Trump's era, which means I would, differ what people say and what they do. However, being a Russian, I always have a hope.
It's America's adversaries and allies waiting to see what move President-elect Trump makes over Ukraine. One report said the transition team already has proposals for Ukraine. Two European diplomats telling NBC News those plans have not yet been shared.
Our thanks to Keir Simmons for that report. At this point, Mr. Trump has not responded to Putin's invitation to a pre-inauguration meeting.
Let's switch gears to the economy now. As expected, the Federal Reserve cut interest rates by a quarter point yesterday.
Fed Chair Jerome Powell faced several questions about President-elect Trump's election win and whether that result would impact the central bank's policy stance. Here's what he had to say.
In the near term, the election will have no effects on our policy decisions. As you know, many things affect the economy, and anyone who writes down forecasts in their job will tell you that the economy is quite difficult to forecast looking out past the very near term. Here, we don't know what the timing and substance of any policy changes will be. We therefore don't know what the effects on the economy would be.
Here to help us digest this decision is Investopedia's editor-in-chief Caleb Silver. Caleb, good morning. So no surprises there when it comes to an interest rate cut, but what did we learn about the health of the economy? What do we think about future rate cuts? I know you're always reading the tea leaves.
Yeah, first of all, that was a fascinating press conference. We'll get into some of the details later, but what Powell was basically saying is that the economy is in really good shape right now. They cut a quarter point because they have the inflation and unemployment picture in check. He even said the goals are in balance right now, so they did cut a quarter point. They've telegraphed that. They'll probably cut another another quarter point at that December meeting, but then everything is up in the air. Why? Because we don't know the total makeup of Congress. We don't know if there'll be the extension of the tax cuts. The economy, as Chair Powell said, very difficult to forecast. It is a moving, very interesting ecosystem right now, especially with this election.
This is a very gradual process. When we talk about a quarter point for the average American, their wallets, what does that mean when it comes to mortgage rates, when it comes to credit cards?
Yeah, you would think that the Fed lowering interest rates would help mortgage rates come down a little bit. They've been very sensitive to the 10-year yield. So they've actually gone up, especially this week, as it looks like we're going to have a lot more government spending. That's going to push deficits up. So mortgage rates really haven't responded to that. But what has responded to that is that money looks a lot cheaper to borrow. So we've seen a lot more borrowing activity. We've seen a lot more offers for credit cards with lower APRs. And the flip side of lower interest rates is that you're going to get less in the bank from your savings account or your CDs going forward.
So you, of course, know that now President-elect Trump appointed Powell back in 2017 when he was president in his first term. There has been some tension, though, historically in this relationship. This was one of those things that came up in that press conference yesterday. Walk us through the relationship and what we heard yesterday.
Yeah, Powell was appointed by Trump in 2017 to lead the Fed, replacing Janet Yellen, and he criticized him throughout his term for not being more aggressive on interest rates. And I don't know how much more aggressive they could have been, because remember, after COVID, the Fed floored rates to zero, which got us out of that recession very quickly, got us out of a bear market. But then he jabbed him throughout his term. Powell's term ends in 2026. He was asked very directly by many reporters, and this was probably the biggest question on everybody's mind, if President-elect Trump asked you to step down and resign, will you? Unequivocally, he said no. And they said, why not? He said, that's against the law, right? You can't just kick me out of my job, basically. But he was really tight about it. But he kept getting that question over and over again. President-elect Trump says he wants some influence over interest rates, and there's even been talk of moving the Fed under the executive branch if he could possibly do that.
The entire point, though, of the Fed is it shouldn't be under the executive branch, right? It should be this independent body.
Right. You want the Fed to have the freedom to set interest rates to keep the economy growing and in check, and keep the unemployment picture in check, and keep prices in check. If the executive branch has control over that, there is no telling what could happen. We've seen it happen in other countries. It doesn't end well.
Caleb Silver, thank you so much.
Firefighters in Southern California are struggling to contain the fast-moving mountain fire, which has already destroyed more than 130 homes. At least 10,000 people are under evacuation orders to escape the fire. And officials say it's only 5% contained so far. NBC News correspondent Dana Griffin's on the ground in Ventura County with the latest.
Good morning. There is some good news today. There has been progress on the forward progression of the mountain fire. Right now, it is 5% contained, but more than 20,000 acres have burned. And in neighborhoods like the one we're in now, half of the homes look like this. Many left in ruins. The family that lived here, they evacuated with a 7-week-old baby. They tell me within 10 minutes, they believe their home started burning up as they evacuated. We've seen crews walking around trying to assess the damage so far. 132 homes have been destroyed. Another 88 have some sort of damage. The governor of California declaring a state of emergency in Ventura County as crews work to assess the damage and try to stop the forward progression of the fire that is still burning in areas deeper that go into the more mountainous areas. We know that red flag warning has subsided in areas where we are now more of the lower lying areas, but in the mountains, that red flag warning will continue until 11 a.m. today. And officials say that although the Santa Ana winds are dying down, we are not out of the woods yet, because yet another Santa Ana wind event is expected midweek. Back to you.
Dana Griffin, thank you.
Well, now let's get more on the winds and the weather driving these fire conditions. We have meteorologist Angie Lassman here.
Yeah, she's tracking the fire danger out west, also in the Northeast, where we're not getting much rain. Angie, good morning.
Good morning, guys. That drought continues to be a concern. We've got, of course, all those ingredients there to see the fire weather continue over at least the next day or so. Let's start in the Northeast, where we've got 49 million people, including folks in Boston, New York, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C., under these fire alerts. You can see in the bright pink, that's a red flag warning. The fire weather watch up as well for parts of Pennsylvania. We've got the drought that I just mentioned, and we've got winds expected to be over 30 miles per hour. So again, all of those ingredients that we've been watching for a couple of days now. Similar story for folks in Southern California, stretching from Santa Barbara County down to the border. We have those red flag warnings up. Now, this is going to be a slight improvement from what we've seen over the past couple of days, but we've still got gusty winds. We've still got low relative humidity, and we still have the potential or lack thereof of seeing any rain across this region. So the drought continues. That means that the a really quick fire spread is going to be possible yet again today, especially if some of those embers are caught in the winds. We know how quickly those move and how quickly those fires continue to start. The big picture look of the drought, pretty impressive. I mean, not impressive on the intensity scale, but we have a record 87% of the lower 48 under a drought right now. Nearly every state in the United States has some sort of drought happening right now. And when you specifically look at the Northeast, more than half of it under a moderate drought and 20% in a severe drought. So all of that to say that we need rain across this region. And unfortunately, we don't have a lot in sight. Where we do have rain is in the middle of the country. There's a winter storm that's working across parts of the Rockies, bringing snow for folks there and bringing rain across the plains. Now, that rain already bringing us flood alerts for Oklahoma and Texas. We do need the rain in this region, but of course, when it all happens at once, it can be problematic, but we'll take it at this point. We've got that snow happening across Colorado. By tomorrow, it moves into the Midwest and parts of the Tennessee and Ohio valleys and stretching down to the Gulf Coast, and we'll watch for impacts there. Now, when it comes to the amounts of rain, 1-2 inches, again, we'll take it. Most importantly, across areas that have severe drought right now, from Texas to Kansas, that's where we're going to have some additional rain. So there is some relief in sight for folks there, guys. But I just showed you almost every state in the country has some sort of drought ongoing. So we could use a little bit of that rain for the Northeast, for the West Coast, really almost everybody at this point.
Yeah, don't love a rainy day, but I think right now we could use it.
Yes, we can.
Absolutely. Thank you, Angie.
Of course.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.